Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Washington Nationals March to October. We have made it to the postseason once again, but before we can get started on the postseason, we gotta go back and recap the regular season. Now, every single time I do a regular season recap, I get carried away. It goes way too long. That is not happening today. I'm keeping myself in check, so let's not waste any time. Let's start recapping the regular season. So obviously, we did not win the division. We tried to make one final push on the Braves, but we just did not have what it took. So that's 2 seasons in a row now that we finished second in this NL East. Last year it was to the Phillies, this year is to the Braves. But between us two at the top and the rest of the division, there's kind of a lot of room. Even though it still has the Phillies ranked 7th, the Mets have fallen off, the Marlins are still down there pretty low. We're up to 8th ranked. So over the course now of 2 full seasons, we've gone from ranked 30th all the way up to ranked 8th. As far as the rest of the league goes, the Brewers won the NL Central. Pretty weak division there. 84 and 78 gets the division. Moving over to the West, the Dodgers won with a 98 and 64 record. I think that's, tied with the Braves with the best record in the NL. So no 100 win teams in the National League. And then the wild card is us, the Padres, and the Phillies. And man, the Phillies and Cardinals, they tied. They had the same record. But that was a close race for that 3rd wild card spot. 2 teams tied and the Mets 1 game back, even the Giants being pretty close. Over in the American League, the Blue Jays went 94 and 68 and that won the division. Rays also a 90-win team, and they had 2 wild card teams out of this division. The Orioles just 1 game behind the Yankees. 4 teams above 500 at the finish. In the AL Central, wow, the Guardians? Does that make them the best team in the entire MLB? I was expecting to see more what we'd expect out of the AL Central in real life. Another weak division, kind of like the NL Central was with the Brewers, but man, 105 wins for the Guardians. I guess it makes sense. They did beat up on the division, 39 and 13. And then over to the AL West, oh no, the Astros, they were the best team. Okay, number 1 ranked in terms of overall and the best record in the league, 108 and 54. In the wild card, we have the Rangers and Rays tied, so there had to be some kind of tiebreaker there too. And then the Yankees beat out the Orioles and the Twins by a pretty close margin. In terms of league-wide stuff, that's all we can look at. I'd still really like it if they added it in where you could go and look at league leaders at the end of the regular season, awards, maybe who was on the All-Star team, but that's just still not anything you can look at because it immediately transfers over to postseason league leaders, and there's no way to toggle that. So we just move right into looking at our individual players' seasons, and this is where I tend to get carried away, so we will do our best to not let that happen. So we'll start with Ian Happ, one of our main signings in the off season, and he started the year at a 78 overall, so he progressed pretty nicely up to an 83 with that A potential kicking in. And I mean, yeah, look at that progression across the board. The hitting went way up, the fielding up to an 85, so he'll have a gold badge anywhere we play him, as long as it's a secondary. And then his actual numbers. He was a really solid leadoff hitter. And actually, though, as good as these numbers are, it's not quite as good as the season before. But I don't really think that's anything to complain about. Almost 200 hits. He scored over 100 runs, 33 doubles, 24 bombs. Cut down on the strikeout numbers while actually having more plate appearances. That's pretty good. He stole bases pretty well, 19 for 24. The average up over 300, on base up at 381, solid slugging, good OPS. And that all comes out to a 5.3 wins above replacement. So slightly worse than the season before, but it was a really good season. And we've got him for a long time. Look at this. If he can play like this for even the next 2 or 3 years of this contract, that'll be well worth it. Now on to Luis Garcia, batting out of the 2-hole against righties. He started the year at a 73, so he progressed 4 up to a 77. I like seeing that progression, that he progressed slightly more against lefties, so he's at least attempting to balance out a bit. The +9 to discipline is huge. And we're going to see this as kind of a theme across the board with a lot of these players. We already saw it with Happ, and now now we're seeing it with Luis Garcia, but a very similar season to last year. He got way more at-bats though, because last year he was pretty much a fixture at the bottom of the lineup, batting 9. This year he batted higher up in the order, so that obviously is going to lead to more at-bats. But he had the same number of doubles and home runs in more at-bats. Got a couple extra triples, a couple extra hits in general, drove in 100. We like seeing the walk numbers up a bit, strikeouts down. Still not great at stealing bases, but that is an improvement over last year. Average was a bit down, but not really at the expense of much on base percentage. Slugging's a bit down, but for what he is for us, I mean, this is just another really good season out of him. He was Mr. Clutch again. The WAR slightly down, but it's just, I don't know. I love using him. I love stepping up to the plate with Luis Garcia, especially with runner in scoring position. Then we have Joey Meneses up to an 87. Started the year, I think, at an 85, maybe 86. And he also had himself a really similar season. He kind of came back strong near the end. His home run numbers were down, but he went on a bit of a surge. The doubles were way up. The hits actually were up. He missed one game though, so he came one game shy of 2 straight seasons of playing every game. The walk numbers were way down actually, which last year, 99 walks for, I mean, he would have finished at 59 discipline. That is almost borderline unrealistic at that point. So 65 might be more where he lives with his rating. But obviously that leads to a dip in the on base. His slugging was down a bit too, but I mean, he just had another amazing season. I don't know how many more of these we're going to get out of him because he's already aging. He'll be 32 next year, but as long as he doesn't regress, he should be putting up similar numbers. Then on to Gavin Sheets. I think when we traded for him, he was a 72. He actually didn't progress a ton, not as much as I'd hoped, not as much compared to some other guys, and he did okay. I mean, there's nothing really to complain about there. Solid power numbers, solid average and on base. Not really gonna expect too much more out of him, honestly. Maybe a little bit more home run potential would be nice with good power against righties, but 19, it's not like a low number. Then on to Lane Thomas, who seemed to be having like this season to end all seasons at the start of this year. Did not at all fall off a cliff. It's just kind of he gradually regressed down, but still had a really good year. Power numbers were down a bit, but he also had a lot less at bats, so maybe it all equals out on a rate basis. Drove in a lot of runs though. He was a good run producing bat, and he was better at stealing bases this year. 14 for 17 is pretty good. Finishes with an 863 OPS, a 2.4 wins above replacement. I'm actually a little surprised it's not a little bit higher than that actually, but it'll be interesting to see what the future holds for him, because well, on this screen it says he's a free agent next year. He's not. We'll have him for one more season, but we might want to do a Victor Robles situation and trade him during the next season before we just straight up lose him to free agency, because I don't know if he's somebody that I'd want to bring back and keep around, with having James Wood and Elijah Green, Robert Hassel coming up through the system, and we'll talk about them a little later too, so stick around. But next we come to CJ Abrams, probably the first disappointment on the offensive side. He started at a 72, got up to a 75 here by the end. We see that -3 to his contact versus lefties, which is not what you want to see from the weaker side like that. But the discipline went way up again, +7 on that. The fielding's looking a little better, little by little. He still struggles at short, but so does everybody apparently. But honestly, with this skill set, he himself is turning into a good future right field option, I feel like, because with that reaction, with the arm, the speed, maybe one more year of progression and he'll get up to that bronze fielding badge in a secondary. I could see him actually being a decent fielding right fielder, so maybe that's his future. But we'll talk about his present, which was not as good as his past. His numbers definitely took a hit this year. I don't really know if he overperformed what he should have last year and this is just more normal. Maybe it's something in between, I don't know, but just a lot less of everything really. However though, about halfway-ish through the season, it was him and Ahmed Rosario that I kind of like called out and switched their roles and benched some of them, and Abrams did improve a decent decent amount since then. I remember his on base was under 300. It finishes at 333. But yeah, definitely a down year for him. And I think, yeah, he finishes slightly negative in wins above replacement. Matt Chapman, though, was somebody who was starting to look like a disappointment and then became anything but. He started this season at an 87 overall, and last second he had jumped up to an 89 now. Pretty good progression actually for his hitting, especially his contact and discipline. And he put together a really nice year, maybe his best year. It was not looking like this either for like the whole first half of the year. He was having good home run numbers, but that average was like down at 220 or below. But I don't know, something happened and he turned it around. Up over 30 homers, 26 doubles. The average really good for what it could have been at 263. I mean, that's, I think, the second best average of his whole career. Really good on base, good slugging. The OPS is up there, and he finishes at a 5.2 wins above replacement, which is a career high. So by that metric, this was his best season, and we have him for 2 more after this. Pretty cheap. So I'm looking forward to a couple more nice seasons out of him. Bear Ruiz up to a 76 from a 72. And he, I feel like, is just maybe one of the most underrated players on this team. I don't know if that makes any sense because I'm the only one sitting here rating these players, but it just seems like he's always doing better than you'd think he's been doing. The hitting progressed a ton, plus 9 to the discipline is huge, up to a 62. And he had a really similar season again to the last season. He actually had the exact same number of at-bats. He got in a few more games because I had him DHing against lefties, so he didn't have to sit out as often, but I also had him a little further down in the order, so I think that's why he ended up with the same number of at-bats. The doubles were down, but the homers were up, and that leads to a 2-point difference in the slugging percentage, literally 1 total base different between the years. But he was drawing more walks this year, so that on base percentage was up. The walk percentage itself was up, 2.5% basically. Struck out a little bit more though, which is disappointing. But that's really the only thing that is disappointing about his season. A 4.2 WAR. And then to round out the starting lineup, the biggest disappointment by far, Ahmed Rosario. Another one of the main offseason signings, and I signed him to be the present and the future. I mean, he was young with an A potential. Seems like he was going to be good already with a lot of room to get up to a 90 plus. And he still managed to progress. He started the year at an 83, so he went up 2 overall still despite being horrible. But yeah, his numbers were just disappointing. But not across the board. I can't say disappointing across the board because for some reason, the extra base hits were like the same. 2 less doubles, 4 more triples, and 3 less home runs, but also in 70 less at bats. So I bet if I go over here to the isolated power, it's gonna be, he actually had a better ISO this year. So that's just extra base hits per at bat. Slugging percentage minus batting average. But what I thought he'd be the best at is contact hitting, and that's not what he was good at. That average stayed down at 237. The on-base percentage couldn't climb over 300. He was a good base stealer, 14 for 14. Probably should have done it more, but maybe he just didn't have the chance to without being on first base all that often. I don't know. If he can just next season bounce back to what he should be, he could be so much better for us. Like if he can maintain the extra base hits that he had this year, but then just get the average numbers up back up to the 280, 290-ish that it seems like he normally is, he would be that player that I was hoping to get from him. I mean, he's still finished with a WAR of 1 with such a bad season or such a disappointing season. He was, I swear, all these 11 errors happened in the first like 2 months. So it must have really made a difference once that fielding rating got up to a 70 and he had that silver badge at short. But he also has been playing center, and I feel like when I'm in the game, he plays a pretty decent center. I don't know if that's really going to be the spot for him, especially if we end up committing to having Abrams play more left or right, I mean. But yeah, if he already has fixed the fielding, but if he keeps the fielding fixed, fixes the batting average, he'll be all fine. Over to the bench, Isan Diaz was a call up. We had a fast track and then a call up with him, so that's why he has the crazy progression. He wasn't that great, honestly, in the time that he spent in the bigs. 3 of those 5 home runs came in the same game. So I don't know. I really hope those numbers get better, because in terms of his attributes and his potential now, he really does have the potential to be a really good infield utility player. Then Kevin Kiermaier was another offseason signing. Brought him in pretty much for his fielding and speed, and that's what he gave us. At first, he was giving us a really good offensive season, but that cooled off. Still hit 8 bombs though, tying last season in half the at-bats, really. But yeah, we know what we're going to get out of him, and we pretty much got it. Maybe even a little bit better with that slugging percentage where it was. But no errors in the outfield. Whenever I had him in, if the ball was hit to center, he was running it down. So like he did his job. We've got him for 1 more season also. I would assume we're going to start calling up some of our prospects, so he'll probably have more of a reduced role than he had this last season. But it's always nice to have somebody with that kind of fielding and that kind of speed to come off the bench. I really don't have anything to say about Alex Call, because he spent most of the season down in AAA, but he had a good season in AAA. In 12 at-bats, he had a good season up in the bigs. He was on the team pretty much all last season, and he wasn't anything special. He wasn't bad, but he wasn't like great by any means. But he did have a lot of progression, especially against righties. So at least for this postseason run, maybe he has some value. And then finally, Jorge Alfaro, 1 more offseason signing. He's our backup catcher for this year and beyond, and he was really good in that role. The numbers calmed down quite a bit from how it was looking through a couple of months. But yeah, he started actually against lefties. He was our starting catcher against lefties because those numbers are pretty good. Had some pretty good power numbers. The average up at 270, 754 OPS. He actually stole 6 bases. He went 6 for 6 stealing bases. Finishes with a 1.2 wins above replacement. Not really much more to say about him. He just did exactly what I wanted him to do, and maybe more. And now we move over to pitching. Blake Snell was somebody we traded for right before the deadline. I don't have in front of me what his numbers were when we traded for him, but I think they ended pretty much the same in terms of ERA. He's got big strikeout numbers, but also big walk and home run numbers, which isn't good. But I feel like once we traded for him, he did pretty good, even if the ERA didn't really come down. I don't know. I didn't really ever see a problem with him. Yeah, I really don't have much to say about him. We have him for a while still, so I don't know. I'm kind of at a loss of what to say. He's just solid. He's good. Then we have Yoan Adon up to an 83. Started this season at a 79. He really pitched like our ace pitcher this season. Really didn't do much differently or better than he did last season. Maybe gave up fewer home runs, like at a lower rate, but that's about it. The ERA is pretty much the same. I feel like the strikeouts per 9's got to be about the same, but he did it over the course of a full season this year, so that's what makes him so good. And he finishes with a 5.4 wins above replacement, and at 25 years old, with a lot of time left under team control, I don't know how much higher he's going to progress with that B potential, but even if he stays where he is, he's going to be a fixture in this rotation for a while. Same with Cade Cavalli, also up to an 83 and also started at a 79. He, though, had a weird season. Now, he did give up a lot of hits, which is what's going to lead to that ERA being up over 4. But we're going to see when we scroll to the right that his FIP is looking pretty good. We may as well just look at that now. But his FIP was 329. So basically what that means, and I'm not going to do the best job of explaining it if you don't know, but it takes into account only home runs, walks, and strikeouts, and somehow calculates how good the pitcher should have done based on only the things they can control. So this pretty much predicts that based on what he did that he has full control over, the strikeouts, the walks, the homers, he should have had a 3.29 ERA. Now, that's not a perfect stat because obviously he gave up a lot of hits, and that's where those runs are going to come from. But I don't know. If he can get those hits down, he's going to start having some really nice seasons with those high strikeout numbers. Then we have Josiah Gray, who last year I thought emerged as our ace pitcher, because he definitely pitched like it last year. He took a step back this year, started at a 76, made his way up to a 79, but he pitched in way less innings, 2 less starts than last year, but like 40 less innings. And in fewer innings, he gave up more runs, more walks, more hits. He probably gave up a similar amount of home runs on a rate basis, but the strikeouts also were a lot less. I mean, last year he struck out 259 in 229 innings. This year he didn't even have a strikeout per inning. So I doubt you can say this was really a bad season. We can see what he needs to improve on, and a lot of it is just the walks. Like, that got way worse. So if he can get that back under control, he should be just fine. And then finally we have Mackenzie Gore, who was not a starter after we traded for Blake Snell, so he has a lot of relief appearances. But in a very similar amount of innings as last year, his numbers actually came down, which, now that I'm looking at it, I don't know how the ERA is better. Like, he gave up so many more hits. He gave up more walks and more homers, but that ERA managed to drop by like a half a run. I don't know, man. He's still progressing at the same rate that Gray is progressing. He's up to a 79. He's an A potential, so he should get way better, all the way up to that 90 mark. But until he starts playing like it, I'm not gonna buy it. Like, he was kind of playing like it towards the tail end of last season. I remember his ERA was like up at 7. And then he went on a tear at the end of the year to get it down to where it was. But this whole last year, he just kind of stayed at the level that he ended at. And that's not the best level. Over to the bullpen with Steven Strasburg, who I don't want in the bullpen, but I don't really think I have a choice in that, because literally every single game in the playoffs, they readjust the rotation and he'll just get automatically moved out again. So I may as well just keep him here. But in what I kind of hope is his last full season, because his regression really started kicking in. He was fending it off for a while. That's why I ended up holding on to him for the whole season. But he's down to a 77 now, and he had the same kind of Cade Cavalli FIP situation, even though he didn't give up as many hits per inning. But he finished with a 4.72 ERA, and the FIP was at 3.32. But either way, this was a much better season than I would have expected out of him at this point. He did fall off near the end, so that ERA looks a lot worse than it looked throughout the year. But yeah, I definitely hope that I didn't wait too long to trade him, because he's still got 2 more years of getting paid a lot of money. So I hope somehow, some way, early next season we can trade him, and by that point, I won't really care what we get for him. Like, I'll just be looking to move him. Trevor Williams was another call up. We got a nice boost with him after calling him up midway through the season. He got into a lot of games, 25 appearances, almost 70 innings, and he put up really good numbers. So this was just a really solid call up, and he should be good if we need to use him in any sort of long relief role for the postseason. So yeah, just a solid season out of him. Jordan Hicks was another offseason signing who turned out to be a really good one. A lot of progression in just one season. I guess he did start at a 76 and only got up to an 80, so overall wise it's not anything crazy. But he gave us 85 innings of long relief and only had a 2.42 ERA. The walks were not nearly as much of a problem as you would have thought. I mean, 39 and 85 and 2/3 is a little high. It's going to be a little over 4 walks per inning, but that is not unmanageable. Like, if he's going to walk that many, but then also only give up 60 hits in 85 and 2/3 innings, that kind of balances out, and it's all good in my book. Struck out over 100 batters and finishes with a 1.3 wins above replacement. Then we come up to Joe Mantiply, maybe who I'd consider our best arm in the bullpen. But now this season, he wasn't the only lefty, so he got a little bit less work. I'd like to see him get into more games just because he's so good. But I mean, yeah, look at this. Another season he turned in that was just amazing. A 1.42 ERA. I guess, you know, it might be a little slightly concerning that his walks went up and his strikeouts went down. Well, actually, his strikeouts didn't really go down on a per inning basis, but the whip did go up over 1, which is still not bad. It cut his wins above replacement in half though. But I mean, he's just really good. He's so good, and we still have him for another, I think, probably 2 years of team control. Being 33, though, you never know if he's going to start regressing. But even if he does, I feel like he's going to be solid for long enough during the regression that he should give us plenty of good work still. Matt Moore was our other lefty option that I signed in the offseason. I didn't really use him often because most times that I would play, if I wanted a lefty in, I would just bring in Mantiply and he was always ready to go. So I didn't really use Moore a lot. I actually didn't realize he ended up regressing slightly because for a while at the beginning, he actually progressed a bit. But just a solid year turned in from him actually. 27 innings, only 19 hits allowed, only 7 walks, striking out 36 with an even 3 ERA. I mean, he gives Mantiply a run for his money actually as like a go-to lefty. I definitely got to keep him in mind more to use during this postseason because he's probably going to be pretty solid. Hunter Harvey has not really progressed how I hoped he would. He started the year at a 67, so he only went up 1, and it's pretty much +2s across the board. But yeah, I don't know. When I first started this March to October and I saw him as like a 64, 65 with a B potential, even at his age, I thought, oh, maybe he's got a chance to get really good because he has a pretty good pitch mix with that high velo, pretty good hits and Ks per 9.2. But he got in a lot of games. He gave us 34 innings of work and he was fine. Like, he was solid. I don't really see him being on the team next year. Like, I would imagine one way or another we're gonna have a better bullpen option than having a guy in the 60s out there. I don't know. I mean, he was fine. I mean, 34 innings with a 3.67 ERA is not bad. Finished with a positive wins above replacement. So I don't know. I mean, as far as the 68 overall goes, could have been way worse. Speaking of way worse, we got Nick Sandlin. Another kind of disappointment, even though he turned it around in the last chunk of the season. He did manage to progress from a 79 up to an 81. But yeah, you could see right away, compare last season of a 197 ERA to a 464, but a 464 compared to what he was doing for the first like 2/3 of the year, where he was up at like a 6.30 ERA, he definitely got things back under control. But he gave up way more hits and walks than he did the year before. Also struck out more batters though, but if striking out less means 3 runs difference in the ERA, I'd rather him do that, you know? Actually though, he finished with a similar wins above replacement, which makes no sense. The FIP was way better than you'd think. So I guess in this calculation, the strikeouts do matter a lot. And then finally, Scott Effross became our closer after we got rid of Kenley. Or we didn't get rid of Kenley, we just moved him down when we called up, I think, Trevor Williams, and he took over and was a pretty good closer. The numbers are a little inflated because he decided in the last game of the season to just give up 4 runs and blow a save, but I think the majority of those 10 blown saves came before he was the closer. So I don't know, maybe he came in situations with that free runner on second or something, like maybe we had scored in the top half of the inning, brought Effross in, and then he gave up the free run. So like, it's not really bad on his part, but it's still technically a blown save. But I feel like whenever I pitched with him, he was really good. Like, I felt pretty confident in shutting the game down when he got brought in. Good strikeout numbers, very few walks, good whip. I mean, I like him as a closing pitcher. I'd just obviously like to see that number down and that number down. So that is it in terms of the MLB roster. I don't know, did I really keep myself under control this time? I guess we'll see. But I do have one last thing I want to go over. This is the only way we can see some of our prospects, what they finished at during this season. We can go forward on this depth chart here. So let's look at James Wood first. He got up to a 73. I don't remember what he started at. He either started at a 69 or 70, but I remember at the beginning he had some trouble progressing. But he ended up with solid progression across the board. Those hitting numbers are starting to look playable, I feel like, especially with a fast track. So hopefully next season he'll be on the 40-man roster, not quite called up yet, and then we could have a chance to fast track him or call him up, or both. would be ideal. Elijah Green was our other big prospect along with James Wood. He only made it up to a 72 though because he could not progress against lefties. He is a year younger but has the B potential, so that's kind of the trade-off between him and Wood. But I'm starting to feel like Wood is establishing himself a little bit more as a better prospect. But speaking of establishing themselves as a better prospect, Robert Hassel, look at this. The potential went up. He was not really on the same level as Wood and Green going into this season. I think both of them were like 70s, and Hassel was down at a 65, but Hassel made it up to a 70. He had a lot of progression of that contact. The potential went up to an A. And with him having that first base secondary and Gavin Sheets not being a standout player, I would not be shocked if Robert Hassel could step in and do pretty good after a fast track. Brady House is another big name prospect coming up through the system. He's up to a 71. And he's just looking really good across the board. I'm really excited to use him. Good progression throughout the year. And yeah, I want to get him up. And that's kind of why I only signed Matt Chapman to a 3-year deal. But I feel like House might even be ready to go before Chapman is ready to leave. And then all that's really left is our pitchers that we picked in the draft last year. So Howard Ramirez was our first pick. He made it all the way up to a 72, but in my opinion, he's still nowhere near ready to play at a big league level. That pitching clutch just needs so much work, being only at a 15, and his stamina is the exact same as Jordan Hicks. So like if Jordan Hicks isn't a starter, I kind of feel like Howard Ramirez isn't going to be a starter, but you don't really see stamina improving year to year, so I doubt that's going to really get any better. Estevan Zapata though, he's the one that I'm really thinking is going to be a good starting pitcher. A little bit behind in terms of overall, but he's only 18, so being up to a 67 is actually really good. Michael Hinojo got up to a 73 as a C potential. If he makes his way onto the 40-man and we could get him a call-up chance, he'd probably bump up to a B potential, and he'd probably bump up to like a 78, 79, and then that turns him into something that could be really good. And then we can't see... oh man, what was his name? Miguel Valencia, but we can see Pedro Almanzar. He made it up to a 61. Not really much to say about him. He's just progressing pretty nicely also. So that is going to do it for our regular season recap. Hopefully I kept myself under control, but glancing at the recording time, I'm thinking not. Next episode will be the start of the postseason, so make sure you come back for that. We'll be taking on San Diego. But for now, guys, that's going to do it. So as always, if you enjoyed, leave a like for me. If you're not yet subscribed to the channel, but you made it all the way into the stat recap episode, come on, man. Let's hit that subscribe button. Let's get that going. But that is gonna do it for today, guys. Thanks for watching. Thanks for gutting it out to the end, and I will see you next time.